All
But
right.
anyway, you ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to One Bottle Each, the Gambero Rosso edition. I'm here with my friend Jeff Kralik, aka the Drunken Cyclist. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Gabe, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I decided I have to start battling your T-shirt. So this is unfortunately not in French. I'm a big fan of Tintin, the French version, but this is the English version of the Blue Lotus, or Le Lotus Bleu in French. So
I would have expected it to be in French, honestly, but we'll
I
let it
know.
slide.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you, and that is going to sit with me at least for the rest of this conversation we're having.
Yeah. So this episode's a little different than some of the previous episodes in that instead of Jeff and I sending each other a bottle of wine to taste, in the last week, he and I have participated in 3 master classes, seminars with Gambero Rosso, the Italian magazine, and we've tasted a number of Italian wines, and we each picked one of those wines from those classes to taste tonight. So we're talking. So it's going to be Italian wine, obviously. Then, so Jeff, what is your experience with Italian wine? Like, where was the entree point for you? When did it enter your consciousness and become something that you drank on the regular?
That's a really good question. I honestly, you can tell we haven't really prepped this all that well because I wasn't prepared for that question. But as you know, I was a bicycle tour guide in France for a number of years, and my mentor there, who I've learned a lot about wine, his opinion of Italian wine was it's not French, and his opinion of white Italian wine was it's terrible. So I had that bias for a long, long time, and I would say even for I don't know how you feel about this, but talking about Italian whites specifically, 20 years ago, for maybe 30 years ago for sure, the Italian whites, but I think they've come a really, really long way, particularly the whites. I mean, the reds have always been, stellar, particularly from certain regions. But the whites, I think that they've really been paying more close attention to winemaking and in the vineyards and vineyard management. And now, I mean, I've made a few trips to Italy, and gosh, I just gush about Italian wine now. So I'm a huge fan now. Whereas, 20 years ago on the bike, I was certainly a French snob. So.
Yeah, I'm with you there on a lot of what you said. In terms of the white wines, I think, not that long ago, really, maybe even a decade ago, you really had to pick and choose and really sort of seek out interesting, Italian whites. But now there's quite a few of them, and not every region, because obviously some regions just aren't suited to it. But there's quite a few interesting ones, and they do a lot of deep dives into varieties and single vineyards, like anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's incredible about Italian wines. I mean, if you compare it only with French wines, the number of native varieties is small, right? I mean, the French is really, you could probably count to maybe 10 grapes that you can find pretty much in France, and there's a few others that filter in. But in Italy, there's 300 type. I mean, you can find over 300 type varieties in Italy. It's just amazing the really vast variety that they have there. It's incredible.
It really is the only place I've been to that rivals that now, and they're not yet growing them all to a big degree. But the country of Georgia has also an insane number of grape varieties. But since they've only had so many years since they've left, Soviet rule and have been able to start repropagating native varieties, those aren't all being made, so it's still a smaller number that are really going into the bottle so far. But yeah, quite a few grapes there too. But you're right, Italy, the diversity is it's incredible. It's really incredible.
Yeah, Georgia was one of those trips that was canceled for me for COVID. So
Yeah,
thanks for poking that bear there.
sorry to hear that. It was that was an eye opener for me. But I hope you get back. I hope you get to go there before too long.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of as a transition. So the wine that I chose 15 years ago, maybe less, for me, Prosecco was, to put it bluntly, like the cheap man's champagne. And for a champagne lover that you know that I am, it was really cheap champagne. Because most of what you saw in this country was the DOC stuff, the stuff that's farmed on the valley floor, machine harvested, not very interesting, mass produced. And then once Prosecco really started to take off, that really exploded. And I thought, okay, Prosecco, I can just check that off. But then I made a trip to Valdobiadene, one of the key towns in the region, and I was blown away, just blown away. So to me, I've written about this a couple of times on my site. The G, the DOC G, really makes the difference. And so most Prosecco that you see in the US is DOC, and that's the standard stuff. But the DOCG, the Garantia, is really exceptional. And so that's why I chose this one. The Bianca Vigna, it's a Colombiano, Valdobiadene, DOCG, and it's from the Ried de Solio. You could probably pronounce that better than I am because you're, you know.
Well, I have to say, one of the things I agree with is as a G myself, I really do agree with the importance of the G.
I see what you did there. I see what you did there, Gabe.
All jokes aside, I do agree with that. There is, look, like a lot of categories of wine, usually it's there's a lot of mass-produced stuff, and then you have to, sort of seek out the specification that is the higher end, not necessarily higher end always in terms of dollars, higher end in terms of quality and care of the way it was taken care of. I mean, I think this is about $23.
Yeah, and so I mean, of course, it's all relative, right? So it's about twice as much as, maybe a little bit more than your standard Prosecco that you can find, with a bright orange label or a bright light blue label. For those of you that know what I'm talking about, and for $10, those are fine. But you step it up just a little bit, and I think you get such a more interesting wine. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is it seems that the people in Prosecco, the producers of Prosecco, are going to a drier style. For a long time, it seemed that they were using a lot of sugar, well, relatively, to hide some of those kind of acrid, kind of sharp notes that I used to find in Prosecco. But now I think that they're letting the fruit get a little riper, but also vinifying it to dry or beyond. So
and listen, that bit more sugar at a lower price point can be quite appropriate, because let's face it, people who not to totally generalize, but oftentimes entry level people have a sweeter palate and then have to grow into their palate, appreciating drier wine. So certainly at 10 or $12, it's not shocking. But if you pay $23, I know if I pay $23, I don't want a sweet Prosecco. I want something that's going to go with my meal.
Right. And I think this is a lovely wine. It comes from one of the Reeves, so it's a further it's a step up on the pyramid. So you have your basic Prosecco on the bottom, then you have your DOCG at the next level, and then you have some Reeves. I think there are 43, if I'm not mistaken. There's a good handful. So essentially, vineyard designate wines that are a step above the standard DOCG, and this is one of them. I'm not familiar with this particular Reed, but I think this is a delightful wine. Great as an aperitif, I think. But also, as I told you before we got on air, I'm making some Thai basil chicken, and I think this might be a good wine for that.
I could see that. Yeah, I love the elegance of this wine, the minerality and the freshness.
There's still some good fruit there and some really tart citrus. It really, I mean, just drinking it makes me salivate because of all that tartness and brightness that you mentioned. I think it's gangbusters.
I completely agree. And without that sweetness, my palate's not getting tired. And I could just keep drinking this. Yeah, with food for sure, but even by itself, I'm not going to. It's not going to tire me out at all.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit. This is not a shameless plug, although it might come off that way. But what stem are you using for bubbles? Because You're using kind of a standard stem. So I got these from a wine critic, and I'm going to interview her in a couple days. There's so many wine glasses out there. That's going to one of the things I'm going to bring up. Why do we need another wine glass? But I tend to like a little bit wider bowl so I can get my big fat nose in there and smell it. Those tiny flutes they look cute. Cute might not be the right word.
The flute is cute. I find that the what is it? The trumpet. What is the one that flares out? The tulip. I'm sorry.
Well, so you mean like the old school, like the James Bond champagne kind of glass?
I'm saying it's thin and then it just opens up like this, but it's tall. I think it's like a trumpet.
Oh, okay. So not the shallow.
No.
Not the Marie Antoinette glass.
No, not at all. No, not like, no, that looks more like almost like a coupe glass, what you're describing. This
Right.
wine goes all the way to the base. I think it's called the trumpet.
Really?
Maybe I'll have to Google that after we're done.
Oh, I mean, just from your beard alone, you're wiser than I am. So
thank you. Well, some have said I appear to be a prophet, so we'll go with that.
Wow.
So what I was going to say is, if I'm going to go decorative, I'm going to go with that instead of the flute myself. But I find that I get far more out of a standard quality wine glass when drinking sparkling than I do the flute.
Yeah, I found, back when I first started getting into wine and had a little bit of money, I would buy all the Riedel glasses because I had to have the Pinot and the Chard and the Cabernet. Now I kind of have two glasses. I have a white and a red, and that's about it.
I've got one grape specific glass. Can you guess which one I would have?
One is a port.
Well, yes, that too. But I'm sorry, in the dry wine category.
In the dry wine category,
table wines, so to speak.
I don't know.
Because for me, no, Pinot Noir.
Oh, okay, yeah. I still think I have the Pinot glass.
I feel it makes the biggest difference. Just with Pinot, I find it makes more of it. I find with Cabernet, with the Bordeaux varieties, with other grapes, I find that if you have a quality stem, I'm good. With the Pinot Noir, I really can sense the difference more so. That's just me.
Yeah, and next to champagne, Pinot's my thing. So it's always kind of a celebration to open it up. So let's get another glass.
Yeah, fair. So Jeff, we're talking and drinking Prosecco here, but where do the other sparkling wines of Italy fall for you, like Franciacorta and things of that nature?
Yeah, I think Franciacorta's really positioned themselves to be the leader. I don't know if they produce quite enough though to get it out there and really lead from the front. From the Trentino region, I think there's a lot of really nice sparkling wines that are really affordable. I mean, Ferrari is the one that probably people know the most. But I'm a big fan of Mezzocorona, which, $20 more or less for a sparkling. They also have a rosé for the same price. That's really, if you can find it, it's tough to beat. I think other regions are starting to get into the sparkling game, but as you know, it's not easy. First, you have to decide there's two main types of sparkling wine to produce. Neither one of them is relatively inexpensive to get into right away. So as the world, I think, is starting to open up to sparkling more and more, I think Italy might be a little bit behind in that regard. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few years to decade.
Yeah, I agree with you. Kind of like we're talking about, just the whites and even reds too, the increasing quality over the last couple of decades in Italy. Certainly there have been quite a few good sparklers, but I do think that, like you said, it'll be interesting to see if more pop up and if they really dial it down even more in certain areas.
Yeah, because you see, France it's pretty, I hate to keep going back to France, but with the Cremants and each region has their own sparkling wine. It's pretty well established, but you see, particularly in California now, almost every mom and pop to all the way up to the top is doing a sparkling wine now. they're not exactly inexpensive, but everybody's kind of diving into it particularly with places like Rack and Riddle, which is a kind of a place that'll make your sparkling wine for you. You provide the juice, and they'll take it on the rest of the way. It's really an ingenious thing. I mean, they have all the infrastructure, and it's a great idea. And I'm surprised that more of those type of facilities haven't popped up.
That's a good point. So now let's get in the car and let's go slightly southeast to Tuscany. And the wine I selected is Adia di Chiarosa. And so this is interesting. It's a blend of Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Syrah, and Cabernet Sauvignon. And it's interesting for me with international varieties in countries that have so many indigenous varieties like Italy. I often find myself not nearly as interested, because I'm thinking, why am I drinking, Cabernet Franc from Italy when I could be drinking Sangiovese or something like that? But then there are certain expressions and certain characteristics or methodology that they've used that makes me interested. With this one, these guys are biodynamic. They've got feng shui, gravity flow winery. They're growing these grapes at elevation, all things that for me, I'm interested before I put my nose in the glass,
Mm-hmm. So would you technically refer to this as a super Tuscan then?
I don't think it could be a super. I'm not 100% sure, but usually super Tuscans have some Sangiovese in them, and although these guys grow Sangiovese, this one doesn't have any in it. So I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I see it's an IGT, so it's outside of the regulations of the DOC or the DOCG. So kind of the wild, wild west, what they can do with it, right? I mean,
correct. But you taste this and smell it, and I'd be curious what you think, but this is not, listen, there are some great famous super Tuscans, but so often there are these really big wines with giant shoulders that want, a decade before you should even look at them and think about drinking them. And this is not that. This is, it's not a small wine, but it's red fruit. It's got tons of savory herbs, lots of acidity.
that's what I was going to say. It's really acid driven. I mean, which is the difference between those ones that you alluded to that are fruit driven, at least initially, bunch of tannins on the back end. And this has some age on it. It's a 2016, so it's not a 2019 or 2018 just out on the market. But yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, do you have some familiarity with this wine before, or was this the first time that you've tried it?
No, I've had it before, and really knocked me out the first time I had it. And then worth saying, it's $36, and which is the average price anyway on winesearcher.com around the United States for this wine. And to me, for $36, I think this is just a steal. And I know this is everything I like about a medium to full bodied wine. It's got fruit, but it's not over the top. It's just really what I'm looking for with so many kinds of food.
Yeah, and I think you really nailed it. I mean, and that's we talked a little bit about at the beginning about my voyage into Italy, so to speak. And to me, this is a quintessential Italian wine. I mean, those super Tuscans that we referenced, those are meant to be big and overpower everything. But this is like, I can put this on the table and I know it's going to meld well into my meal. It's not going to stand out. It's not going to cause you to say, whoa, like, what's going on here? But there's enough there to think about that you can say, wow, this is really interesting without being, and I think that's what wine in Italy is. I mean, you know better than I do, but it's a part of the meal. It's not aside from the meal or in addition to the meal. It's supposed to work in tandem. And I think this is a fantastic wine for that.
I agree. I think that, you said, you put it on the table if you pour this for somebody blind and just tell them it's Italian wine, they're not going to question. You know, you said this is a very quintessentially Italian wine, I believe is what you said. It is, and they might not guess the grapes if you poured it for them blind, but if you pour some of those big Super Tuscans blind, there really is this an Italian wine? There might be some question there, and it's just not the case here. It has the soul of Italy in it. Is really, I think, what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think that's a great point. I think you exactly nailed it, and I would maybe take it a step further. And wine dorks like us, when people come over for dinner, before we open a bottle, we want to know what their relative wine experience is, right? You're not going to break out your super special bottle. You're not going to, nor do you want to insult them with the $6.99 bottle that you said, how the heck did I end up with this? This wine, I think, would please a wide range of aficionados, right? The beginner would say, wow, that's really interesting. And I think wine geeks like us would say, holy cow, there's a lot going on here and is an incredible value for $35-36.
Yeah, and two reasons, by the way, not to break out that special wine for the person who might not appreciate it. They might not enjoy it, and when you have a guest over, you want them to enjoy themselves, and so it's like definitely a two-edged sword, a double-edged sword. You break out something that you were holding on to for a special occasion. They not only don't appreciate it, they don't even enjoy it. And if they don't enjoy it, you're going to feel like you failed your guest.
Well, and also that you just killed a soldier for no reason, right? I mean,
well, right.
You broke out something.
Both of those things. But I've got when I'm thinking this through, as you were saying it, I have my host hat on, and as a host,
right,
I want my guests to be happy. And if it doesn't matter what I break out, I could break out the nicest bottle of wine I own. If they don't enjoy it, I failed. In a sense, I might not have failed in intent, but I failed in execution.
Right, and I think this is a wine, particularly where it is right now, it would be empty quickly. Right? I mean, it's easy. I mean, there's complexity there, sure, but it's also easy drinking. There's not a ton of chewy tannins on the back end. There's some, so it could go another few years without a problem, I think, particularly with that acidity as well. But I mean, this is what you think of when you think of an Italian dinner, right? The wine is flowing freely. There's a bunch of pasta around, and people are, laughing and having a good time. I think this is a beautiful wine for that.
So yeah, I think to your point of it lasting a while. See, I think it'll last maybe longer than you were insinuating. However, I think the window for wide enjoyability is what you're insinuating. I think in 7 or 8 years, we would find it fascinating, but the person looking for that bit of primary fruit that it does give you, that's going to be gone. And now we're going to talk secondary and tertiary. It's going to get earthier and more leather and all that kind of stuff. So while I would probably love it and you would probably love it, the person that the audience is going to shrink.
Right. See, this is a wine that my wife and I would get into a huge argument about. So
tell me.
If we bought 3 bottles of this, right? I mean, that's usually what I mean, now I once in a while I'll buy a case, but usually 3 bottles, and the magic of 3, right? We drink one when we get home, we'll drink one a few years later, and then we'll hold on to one. Because my thing is, the hardest thing to buy in the wine industry, without a doubt, is age, right? People they release it, they want to sell it, they want to get rid of it. So if you want to age, you're going to have to do it yourself. I would love, like you said, I would love to hold on to this for 10, 15 years, break it out with a little dust and do the whole dramatic thing of wiping it off, and people get all excited. My wife would say, "Oh, it tastes old." And I would say, "No, like leather, and why do I want leather?" So that's a constant kind of argument that we have. She likes fresh and fruity. I like older and distinguished, I guess, because I'm older and hopefully distinguished, but I guess older is true, but distinguished is up for debate.
I'm with you. I mean, I can appreciate the fresh and fruity to a degree, but my appetite for it has certainly, shrunk over the years, and I'm more into the earth, the dusty, the earthy, the funky. over time. But I can appreciate them for what they are. I just choose to drink them less, left to my own devices.
Well, you've been at this a little longer than I have. So is that because, when you mentioned that, is that because of the, without sounding pompous, the number of samples we receive where, you get fresh and fruity wines that I think often I would love to see this in 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years, but people send it to us to open it now and to taste it now and to get words on the screen about what we think about it. And I was just writing about this today that, I've tasting a few Pinots for a tasting I do, which you should come to one of these days in Houston, of Pinot Noir in the fall. And, it's new release Pinot and you're kind of thinking, man, I'd really like to taste this 5 years from now, because that's what I do. I try to hold on to wine that I hide it from my wife so she doesn't see it. Do you think you're getting like a little, your palate's getting a little tired of drinking all these fresh, fruity, high acid wines upon release?
I think there's probably a little bit of that, but I just, I know that when I go to open a bottle of wine, or I'm thinking about opening a bottle of wine simply to drink, I'm not I'm not doing it to write notes or write about it necessarily, although I still might potentially write about anything that I open. Subconsciously, my brain goes to the fresh, fruity, bold wine less often. I think a perfect example for it would be Zinfandel. I love Zinfandel. I've always loved Zinfandel for many years now. However, the Zinfandels I enjoy or appreciate regularly have changed. I'm very much into, I guess, what I would call more of a classic Zinfandel. The ones that have fruit. Certainly, they're bigger. They're big and bold enough, but they're peppery. They're spicy, and they can age. The ones that are pushing, that are huge, that are in your face, that have no finish, just don't appeal to me so much anymore. So that's just one grape, but I think it's emblematic of where my palate has gone over the years. But still, you could taste them and go, like, hey, if you'd like this, it's a good example. Roger Ebert was great at this. Roger Ebert would go, I am not into action movies. However, if you're into action movies, this is a really good action movie. So you have to, if you're going to write about a subject, you need to be able to do that. However, I don't go to see action movies very often.
So my question to that, and that's really interesting, and I try to say that too. It's like I all too often I say, I could see how people would really like this wine. And it would be, I call those crowd pleasers, right? Like this will empty quickly. Is that because we taste a lot more wine maybe than other people, or we're just getting older?
It's probably both. But even if you weren't tasting as much wine as we're tasting, but you're just drinking wine regularly, your palate, for most people, you find those people who their palate doesn't change and they literally drink one wine. Like they just have one wine they drink and they just don't change. But I think most people they you don't change like dramatically, but it kind of slides over time. And I think for a lot of people, their palate gets a little drier. I know for me, I like acid more and more acid I can get, the happier I am usually.
If you said that in the 60s, it would mean something entirely different.
Completely different. So I don't know. For me, I think it's a combination of all those things. But I just find what I'm gravitating towards. Somewhat softer wines often.
No, and so you touched on it briefly, but to me that this is, I think we're in a really good spot in the wine world now, right? There's tons of wines that are really, really good upon opening, or eat within 2-3 years of it. Like this wine's a perfect example. You and I both said that we would agree that we would like to hold on to this varying from 8 to 15 years just to see what happens, because we're geeky like that. But it's tasting so good right now.
Oh, it's fantastic.
That if I had a case of this and I didn't really think about it, it would be gone in a year because it's just fantastic. And it's like, it can go with so many different things, so many different styles. I mean, it's not so heavy that like a salmon dish, I could see that. I mean, it's not so heavy that it would just overpower the fish and just drown it out. But we're in a time now that there's so many great wines that are produced that drink really well upon release. You and I are I don't know if we call this old guard. I don't know if I want to call us that yet, but I always think about, what's this going to taste like in 5 years? And that gets me going and says, let's hold on to the other 2 bottles, hon. And she like goes through the roof.
Yeah, you got to hide it. Thankfully, my cats don't drink wine, so I don't have to hide it from them. I agree with what you said. The old guard. I don't consider myself an old guard, but I'll use the same letters. I'm more of an OG, an original gangster. It's kind of more where I'm at.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I don't know if you have any guns, but I don't want to know right now. So, I mean, you're a few thousand miles away, so I feel kind of safe. I don't feel threatened by you right now, Gabe.
I'm glad. You shouldn't be threatened. We're just talking about wine. And, to your point of how much good wine there is, I think it's worth saying that it's really difficult these days to actually find a really shitty bottle of wine. It might not be to your taste, but most of the wine on the shelf is correctly made, and it is as it was intended. It may not be what you want to drink, but they're making what they intended to make.
No, I agree 100%. And we were talking a little about Italy, a little about France, and I've used the same terminology about both countries. You have to try really hard in both countries to eat poorly. You might not like sheep's brains or whatever's you might, but it's pretty darn good the way it's prepared. I mean, sure, if you look hard enough and you're determined to eat crappy enough, you can find it. And my brother did when I traveled with him in France, which is regrettable. But anyway, but I totally agree about wine. I mean, I would put one caveat. I'd say around $10, north of $10 a bottle. It's going to be correct 95+% of the time. I mean, below $10, you're kind of rolling the dice a little bit, but there's still wines. There's still wines below that. I mentioned Mezza Corona, the sparkling wine. Their Pinot Grigio at my grocery store is $7, which is one of my favorite Pinot Grigios in the world. I mean, it's just consistent and clean and great.
It's a complete crapshoot under $10. But to your point, using the Mezza Corona or whatever, or I would say there's still some wines in that price range coming from South America that you drink them and you're like, wow, this is $8. Let me grab a case of it. And so those still exist. But yes, under $10 is definitely more of a crapshoot. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Jeff, I want to thank you so much. Jeff, salud.
Salud, buddy. Great seeing you. Hopefully we'll do one of these in person. We got to do one of these in person.